What if the key to understanding power, pride, and purpose was buried not in some philosopher's book, but beneath a mountain of gold? Sounds dramatic, right? But that's exactly what Tolkien handed us with Erebor. The Lonely Mountain wasn't just a setting, it was a mirror. A mirror for every human hunger we struggle with: legacy, wealth, identity, and the haunting cost of wanting more. This isn't just another tale about dwarves and dragons. It's about choices made in the shadow of greatness, and how even kingdoms carved in stone can crumble under the weight of obsession. From the glory days of Thrain to the fiery fall brought by Smaug, from the humble courage of a hobbit to the final redemption in battle, Erebor's story is one of rise, ruin, and rebirth. And let's be honest, don't we all have our own lonely mountains? Things we build, abandon, reclaim, and sometimes lose again? That's why this story matters. Because it doesn't just entertain, it teaches. So if you're ready for hidden doors, golden sickness, lost kings, and second chances, you're in the right place. Let's journey inside the mountain and unlock the truths Tolkien buried in its deepest halls. When Khazad-dûm fell to the Balrog in 1981 of the Third Age, it wasn't just a catastrophe. It was the end of a golden chapter for the dwarves. But as with all great losses, something new was born from the ashes. Thrain, I didn't waste time mourning. He gathered his people, packed their resilience, and marched eastward. What he found was more than refuge. It was destiny carved in stone. They called it the Lonely Mountain, but soon it would become Erebor, a name whispered with awe for centuries. The dwarves didn't just survive. They built, crafted, thrived. Under the mountain, they discovered unimaginable veins of gold, silver, and gemstones. But one treasure eclipsed them all: the Arkenstone. A jewel so brilliant it pulsed like a captured star. It wasn't just wealth, it was pride, identity, legacy. You see, that's the thing about purpose. It's not just what you find, it's what it awakens in you. Erebor became a symbol, not just a shelter, and as prosperity boomed, people took notice. Nearby human settlements, like the town of Dale, flourished in Erebor's shadow. Trade routes opened, cultures blended. Prosperity wasn't isolated, it radiated like heat from a forge. It's the perfect reminder: real growth lifts others with it. Just like Erebor, your success should echo beyond your walls. The dwarves knew this instinctively, forging bonds as strong as the steel they tempered. But here's the twist most folks miss. Even at its peak, Erebor wasn't invincible. Thrain's son, Thorinthus, looked elsewhere, his eyes drawn to the promise of richer veins in the Grey Mountains. Call it ambition, wanderlust, or a classic case of the grass is greener. Still, it begs the question: what do we leave behind when we chase something shinier? The Lonely Mountain was left silent, but not forgotten, and so begins the long echo of dwarven fate, one shaped by mountains, missteps, and migration. Because what Thorin didn't know was that leaving Erebor would light a fuse that dragons would one day follow. When Thorin packed up and moved his people to the arid Mithrin, the decision seemed logical. On paper, the Grey Mountains promised richer ores, new mines, and fresh opportunities. And for a while, that bet paid off. The dwarves dug deep, built fast, and filled their coffers with dazzling treasures. It was the classic entrepreneurial pivot: high risk, high reward. But as every seasoned builder knows, even the sturdiest gold vein can come with hidden cracks. The Grey Mountains weren't just rich, they were dangerous. The deeper the dwarves dug, the more they disturbed. Unseen eyes were watching. From the frozen north came whispers, then shadows, and then fire. Dragons, those ancient greedy beasts, were drawn like moths to molten light. First came the smaller drakes, testing defenses. Then the big ones followed, and with them came death. If Erebor was a beacon of hope, arid Mithrin became a lesson in hubris. Still, for over 3 centuries, the dwarves held their ground. They fought, endured, adapted. But survival isn't the same as flourishing. Ask any small business owner pushing through burnout. The numbers may look good, but the soul can still be drained. Eventually, the cost of holding Ered Mithrin outweighed the gains. They had wealth, sure, but lost lives, peace, and direction. That's when the deeper wisdom kicked in. Not all treasure is worth the toll it takes to guard it. By the time King Daenai and his son were slain by a cold drake in 2589 TA, the writing was on the wall. Dragons weren't a passing threat. They were an extinction-level event. The dwarves scattered, broken-hearted but wiser, and where did many of them go? Back to the mountain they'd once left, back to Erebor, because sometimes the future hides in your past. It takes courage to build, but it takes humility to return. So back they went, not in triumph, but with resolve. Erebor, once abandoned, would rise again. And this time, the Arkenstone wasn't just a symbol of pride. It was a promise that even ruins can become roots again if the right hands return to shape them. The dwarves didn't return to Erebor with parades or fanfare. No. It was quiet, determined, like someone going back to a childhood home. Not for nostalgia, but because it holds something no other place can. Thror led them, carrying the Arkenstone like it was the last ember of a nearly extinguished fire. And as they stepped back into the lonely mountain's shadow, the silence spoke louder than drums. We're back, and we're not running again. This second founding wasn't about glory, it was about survival and sovereignty. The Dragon Wars had left their mark. Cold drakes still prowled the northern heights. The dwarves of Erebor couldn't just rebuild, they had to fortify, adapt, reimagine. They dug deeper halls, reinforced gates, and stored knowledge like treasure. If the first Erebor was built on confidence, this one was built on scars. And scars, as any seasoned fighter knows, are maps of where not to get hit again. Meanwhile, Gror, Thror's kin, headed east to the Iron Hills, laying the foundation for a powerful new stronghold. The move wasn't a splinter, it was strategy. 2 flames instead of 1. The dwarves had learned that resilience isn't always about clustering, it's about diversification. In business, in battle, in bloodlines, you need backup. The Iron Hills became Erebor's shield from the east, a buffer and a beacon at once. By the time Erebor was thriving again, it was different, wiser. The culture had deepened. They didn't just chase gold, they crafted beauty. The halls echoed. With the ring of hammers and laughter, trade with Dale resumed. Songs were sung once more. You could feel the pulse of purpose again. It's a truth worth remembering. After every devastation, if you return with clarity, you can build something even stronger than what you lost. But peace, especially in Middle-earth, rarely lasts long. And while Erebor was finally exhaling, again trouble was stirring far beyond its gates. A new shadow was coming, not from the north this time, but from the skies. Because dragons weren't done with the lonely mountain yet, it began like a nightmare wrapped in fire. In 2770 of the Third Age, Smaug descended from the north with all the fury of a storm that had been waiting too long to break. Erebor never stood a chance. Walls of stone meant nothing to a creature that burned hotter than a forge and flew faster than fear. Dale was the first to fall, its homes turned to ash, its people scattered like leaves in the wind. The lonely mountain, once a beacon of prosperity, was silenced in a single day. Smaug wasn't just a beast, he was greed incarnate. He didn't want the gold to spend it, he wanted to sleep on it, bury himself in it, feel it beneath his scales, like a second skin. And inside that treasure hoard, the Arkenstone, the very heart of Erebor, buried beneath a dragon's belly. Survivors, those few who made it out, fled with nothing but memory. That's what made it worse. Not just the loss of wealth, but the loss of identity. The dwarves scattered, wandering in exile, carrying the weight of a kingdom that no longer existed. Thorin, the heir of Thror, grew up with that pain carved into his bones. It wasn't just personal, it was generational. Imagine trying to lead when your birthright is fire-charred ruins. That's the kind of pain that either breaks you or becomes your mission. For Thorin it became the latter, a king without a throne, but not without a vision. Smaug, meanwhile, became a legend. Lake Town, not far from the mountain, lived under the dragon's shadow like a town with a volcano on its doorstep. The people told stories, but no one dared to do anything. And why would they? When your enemy sleeps on a pile of gold the size of a city, you don't poke him. You pray he doesn't wake up, but all things, even dragon reigns, carry an expiration date, especially when fate starts aligning old wounds with new allies. And far away, in a hole in the ground, lived a hobbit, one who had no idea he'd soon be part of a plan to do what no army dared for almost 2 centuries, walk straight into the heart of the lonely mountain and take it back. You know how some stories begin with war drums and sword clashes? This one starts with a map, a wizard, and a very reluctant hobbit. Gandalf, always playing chess while others played checkers, saw something others didn't. Thorin's longing wasn't just grief, it was fuel. But to turn it into fire, he needed a spark. That spark? Bilbo Baggins, a creature of comfort suddenly, handed a key, a contract, and a destiny he never asked for. That's how the quest of Erebor began. It wasn't a grand army marching, it was 13 dwarves and a burglar. And yet, within that odd fellowship, there was more courage than in entire legions. They didn't just walk toward Erebor, they crawled through goblin-infested caves, battled trolls, faced wargs, and endured betrayal. Every step forward felt like a gamble against fate, but that's the thing with real missions. They don't wait for perfect conditions. They ask, "Will you go anyway?" What most people forget is how crucial the hidden paths were. Places like Ravenhill or the legendary Back Door weren't just tactical shortcuts, they were symbols of hope. They represented that even the most fortified darkness has a weak point. In life too, that's a powerful truth. Every seemingly impenetrable situation has a hidden hinge. Find it, and everything opens. That's what Bilbo did. Not with brute force, but with cleverness and heart. And while Thorin saw Erebor as a throne waiting to be reclaimed, Bilbo saw something else, the cost of obsession. The deeper they got, the more Thorin changed. The gold whispered. The Arkenstone gleamed like temptation incarnate. What began as a noble quest started smelling like greed. It's a dangerous thing when a mission mutates into possession. You don't notice it at first. But slowly, the line between reclaiming and hoarding starts to blur. Still, none of it would matter unless Smaug was dealt with. Because even with maps and backdoors and courage, one truth loomed over it all. The mountain was still ruled by fire, and fire doesn't give up treasure without a fight. Smaug didn't just die, he erupted. When Bilbo tiptoed through his lair and stole a cup, the dragon's wrath ignited like oil on embers. It wasn't about the gold, it was about the insult, that someone had entered his domain, touched his treasure, and lived. That was enough to drive him into a fury that would torch the sky. He left Erebor in a blaze, determined to burn Lake Town to cinders, and he nearly did. But this time fate had other plans. Bard the bowman, a descendant of the Lords of Dale, wasn't a king, a wizard, or a dwarf, just a man with courage sharper than his arrows. And when Smaug swept down, fire blazing, Bard stood tall. One arrow, one shot, one weak spot. He aimed, he released, and the dragon's reign ended mid-roar. Smaug crashed into the lake, a falling star swallowed by water. The monster that devoured kingdoms? Gone, just like that. And yet victory didn't bring peace. When Thorin heard the dragon was dead, something shifted in him. He didn't run to rebuild, he ran to barricade, to claim, to count. The Arkenstone, once a symbol of dwarven unity, became a jewel he couldn't part with. Dragon sickness, it's real. It's when gold isn't just wealth. It's worth more than people, promises, or peace. And Thorin, our once noble heir, was drowning in it. Bilbo saw it. That's why he gave the Arkenstone away in secret to broker peace between Thorin and the men and elves who came to claim a share. It was an act of courage that gets too little credit. Because sometimes the hardest battles aren't against dragons, but against pride. Bilbo didn't have a sword. He had something sharper, perspective, and in the end, that's what cracked the mountain's heart wider than any axe. But before any peace could be made, new danger marched from the north. Orcs, wargs, shadows summoned, not by gold, but by power. And so, as the mountain's halls echoed with tension and greed, a greater storm approached, one that would pull every race into its path. The mountain was still smoking from Smaug's death when the next fire lit the horizon, this time not from a dragon but from clashing wills. Thorin had sealed himself in Erebor like a king behind a vault, refusing to share a single coin. Dale was in ruins. Lake Town survivors needed help. The elves brought aid, and the men brought reason. But Thorin? He brought pride. To him, the treasure was owed. To the rest, it was survival. That's how gold turns allies into adversaries. It could have ended in blood. Dwarf against man, elf against dwarf. Lines were drawn, bows were strung, words were like daggers. But then came a rumble, not from within, but from the north. Orcs, wargs, thousands. Azog's army, marching with death in its eyes. And in that moment, grudges became meaningless. That's the irony of war. It forces enemies to remember their shared humanity when it's nearly too late. The battle that followed was chaos, etched into legend. Eagles flew, Bjorn roared, and blades met bone in a frenzy no one had truly prepared for. Thorin, awoken by Bilbo's sacrifice and his own shame, finally charged into the storm with honor. But it came at a price. Fili and Kili, his nephews, fell protecting him. Thorin himself fell soon after, wounded by a Zog, victorious yet broken. In his final breath, he made peace with Bilbo, and that, more than treasure, was his redemption. When the dust settled, it wasn't Thorin who wore the crown. It was Dane Ironfoot, Gror's son from the Iron Hills, a warrior with the heart of a king, and the wisdom to know that Erebor needed more than defense, it needed direction. Under Dane, the mountain healed, trade resumed, trust was rebuilt. Prosperity wasn't hoarded, it flowed, because a real king isn't the one who claims the throne, it's the one who lifts the people sitting at its base. But as the years rolled on, the fires of Mordor began to rise again. And though Erebor was no longer ruled by madness or monsters, it would soon find itself once more in the crosshairs of darkness. Peace, even when hard-earned, is never permanent in Middle-earth. As the War of the Ring erupted, the lonely mountain once again found itself on the edge of chaos. Sauron's eye didn't just glare westward, it reached north too. King Dane Ironfoot and King Brand of Dale stood together against a siege that threatened to reduce their kingdoms to ash. They fought side by side, old friends turned final defenders. And when they fell, they didn't fall retreating, they fell standing. But legacies, when built right, don't die with their makers. Thorin III, Dane's son, and Bard too, Bran's heir, weren't just replacements. They were restorers. They rallied their people, broke the siege, and held their ground until Sauron's fall echoed across the land like a shuttered furnace. And when Gondor rose anew under Aragorn's reign, Erebor and Dale weren't outposts, they were honored allies. Dwarves and men, once divided by treasure, were now bound by sacrifice, and under Gondor's protection, the region bloomed again. Trade flourished across the rebuilt bridges of Dale. The forges of Erebor lit up once more, crafting not just weapons, but works of art. crowns, goblets, instruments. The mountain wasn't just a fortress, it was a cultural heartbeat. That's the mark of true resilience, not just surviving conflict, but using it as fuel for creation. Erebor had become, once again, a place where legacies weren't just remembered, they were made daily. For the dwarves of the Fourth Age, the Arkenstone wasn't lost, it was legend. And while some searched for it, most knew its real power wasn't in its shine, but in what it represented: unity, vision, and the cost of forgetting either. Erebor had lived through abandonment, ambition, fire, greed, redemption, and war. What stood in the Fourth Age wasn't the same kingdom Thrain I had founded. It was something deeper, something wiser. And honestly, that's the only kind of empire worth building. And even now, if you listen closely when the mountain winds howl, they say you can hear the echo of hammers in deep halls and the faint clink of gold in the dark. Because Erebor never truly sleeps. It just waits for the next chapter to begin. So what do we take from all this? Erebor wasn't just a kingdom. It was a cycle, a rise, a fall, a rebirth. And in every part of that story, we see pieces of ourselves. Our ambition, our blind spots, our resilience. Maybe your Erebor is a dream you gave up on, or a goal you're afraid to reclaim, or maybe it's something you haven't even discovered yet. Either way, the lesson is clear. The mountain doesn't define the king, the choices do. So here's the question: what treasure are you sitting on, but too scared to dig for? What dragon have you let sleep too long, because facing it would mean facing yourself? Think about that. Let it stir something in you. And if this journey through the lonely mountains sparked even a flicker of insight, then don't let it fade. Keep learning, keep exploring, keep building your legacy. And hey, if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you see Tolkien's world with fresh eyes, hit that subscribe button. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next tale we dig up from the depths of Middle-earth.